Should we be worried about waterfowl populations? Is the future of waterfowling doomed if we don't make some significant changes? These are the questions we're going to answer on today's video. But first, let's talk a little bit about how the survey is done, because I see a lot of misinformation when it comes to this. Now, the survey is actually done by the federal governments of the United States and Canada. They then publish it and it is then reported by organizations like Ducks Unlimited and Delta. This is where we as hunters typically see these reports, but Delta and DU don't actually conduct the survey. The survey was actually started back in 1947, and its primary purpose was to determine the breeding population of waterfowl and their habitat conditions. That survey, along with harvest surveys such as HIP and banding data, is then used to determine hunting regulations in the United States and Canada, such as bag limits and season lengths. And also, regulations are determined by the previous year's data. The 23 and 24 seasons will be determined by the 2022 survey. Now, the survey is done by ground and air crews over a 2 million mile square area that covers the breeding grounds of Alaska, Canada, and the north central United States. That's the traditional breeding survey. They also have the Eastern survey that handles the eastern part of the United States. It's the largest and most extensive wildlife survey in the world. Basically, they just fly straight lines over the traditional breeding area and the eastern breeding area, counting ducks within a certain distance of the plane. They also count ponds to get an idea of what the habitat conditions are like for breeding and nesting. Whenever possible, they'll also send in a ground crew to also observe and count to get a little bit better read and accuracy on the estimates from the plane. That data is then collected and sent in and analyzed over the next few months and then reported by the Fish and Wildlife Service. This process is to get a good estimate on duck numbers. Obviously, you're not going to be able to count every single duck. That just would not be possible. But the process that they designed is what they think is the best way to estimate it, and it's also a good way to show trends. By counting in the same areas using the same methods year after year, you're able to discern trends from that data, and that's the most important thing, I think, from the survey. Another thing to note about the breeding survey is that it does not include the hatch population. So the numbers you typically see floating around from Delta and DU, those numbers do not include the hatch. They're just the estimated breeding population. All that out of the way, let's jump into this year's survey results and see if we can make some sense out of it. And the first thing I want to look at is total duck population. If we look at this graphic, we see that duck numbers are down 12% from 2019 and down 4% from their long-term average. Now, one thing I've commonly heard since these numbers have been released is people say, oh look, duck numbers have consistently went down since 2016. Something must be wrong, we've got to do something. You have to keep in mind that we're coming off record high duck numbers. The highest duck population on record was recorded in 2015 with a population of 49.5 million. With mallards and green-winged teal also being at their highest on record. As you can see from this graphic, duck numbers ebb and flow with habitat conditions. Notice a gain in population, then a peak, then a dip. This has been happening since we started surveying them. This shows the total prairie pond estimate, and you can see a direct correlation with the numbers. When pond counts are up, duck numbers are up. When water is scarce and pond counts are down, duck numbers are down. But one of the things that stands out the most from this info is the long-term trend. Notice how the peaks get higher each time, and the valleys also get higher. What's also interesting from this data is that when we get dry conditions, it usually produces between a 30 to 35% drop in population. Now, this long-term trend of higher peaks in the population, this is the most comforting thing from all the data that I've went through. To me, it just shows that our habitat is getting better. And I think that that's a result from some really hard-working people who have dedicated a lot to waterfowl. I think it's also the result of the waterfowling community's dollars going to conservation. I don't think a lot of people realize just how bad of a drought has been in the prairie pothole regions over the past few years. 2021 was a peak of these drought conditions, with North Dakota going out 80% from 2020 to 2021 in water and being 68% below the long-term average. The percentage-based decline in the total number of wetlands in North Dakota was the largest in the survey's history. It was the 5th dry survey in 74 years. That is extreme. Saskatchewan, one of the best duck producers we have, also seems similar conditions, with one expert saying that the 2021 drought was close to being the worst drought ever in Saskatchewan. But thankfully, we're coming off record high duck numbers. And I think with the conditions in mind, I think we're extremely fortunate to have as high duck numbers as we have right now. But here's the thing, droughts are important. The drying out process is critical for wetlands. They need periods of both wet and dry to continue to stay productive. So the good news is when water returns to these dry areas, they'll be rejuvenated and much more productive. So am I disappointed, being the mallard guy that I am, that mallards are down almost 25% since 2019? Yeah, I'm disappointed, but this is nothing new for mallards. They've done this before and they're gonna do it again. But like I said, thankfully we're coming off record high mallard numbers just 7 years ago in 2015. Now, one thing I am really concerned about is pintails. Pintails are down 21% from 2019 and down 54% from their long-term average. And the reason this is so concerning is that their decline doesn't have to do as much with water conditions as the other ducks. Farming practices are the main culprit of what's happening to the pintails. Unfortunately, I don't see an easy fix for this. You're not going to change farming practices, so really the only way to help pintails is to just add a ton of habitat that they need to give them more options for nesting. I just know this, I would hate to see a world without pintails. They are an absolutely beautiful, elegant duck, and they're second only to mallards for me. Now, some people's immediate response to these numbers is we need to lower the limits and cut back on the season. We've had literal duck seasons since the 90s in a lot of places, including Arkansas, where I'm from. Under these high bag limits and long season dates, duck populations grew and hit their all-time peak. Also during this time, hunter numbers decreased dramatically. So there's not near as many people hunting as it was 25 years ago. There were 2.3 million active US waterfowlers in 1970, and in 2015 there was a little under a million, which is half of what it was in the 70s. And I know some people say, oh, but the days people are hunting are higher. They're not. You can go look. All this is recorded by HIP data. It's very easy to figure out for the Fish and Wildlife Service if people are truthful on their HIP data. And the fact is, days in the field for hunters have also went down. And Canada has seen it even worse than us. In 1978, they had 505,681 hunters, declining to just fewer than 170,000 in 2015. This is also why Canada's limits are so much higher. They have far fewer hunters than we do, therefore having much less impact. They're able to kill more because all in all, they're still killing less. But I hope to do a whole video dedicated to how harvest impacts the population. But for the purposes of this video, I just want you to understand that we've hit the all-time highs of duck populations with these long seasons and high bag limits. So obviously they're not having that big of an impact when we have the proper conditions in place on the prairies for breeding. Now, does this mean that we should never go back to restricted regulations? Absolutely not. It just means we shouldn't until the populations and the habitat conditions warrant it. And speaking of that, we had far better conditions this year on the prairie than we had in recent years. And while yes, it's going to take a little while to come out of the hole that these recent droughts have put us in, if we have good conditions again next year, we'll be well on our way to getting back to these high duck numbers that we've been blessed to experience over the past decade. I think it's important that we as waterfowlers have an opinion, because our voices do influence policy and our dollars do go on to influence populations and habitat. But I also think it's important that we take the time to do our research and base our opinions on facts, not what this person has heard from somebody or what this person read in a forum. We've been doing this survey for 65 years. The people involved in this process have tons of data from all that time, and they've seen drastic changes in duck populations and habitat conditions time and time again over the past several decades. They're out there every day. It just seems to me like the best bet would be to listen to what they have to say. I mean, I'm open-minded and open to hear other opinions or maybe other facts on the subject, but I've just never seen any 100% concrete evidence to say that this is not the best way to do things, not the best way to know the waterfowl population. Now, that's not to say that this survey doesn't have limitations, because it does. Everything has trade-offs, but this is what they believe to be the best way to monitor and maintain waterfowl populations. And I gotta go with them on that until I see something that says different. And furthermore, for me, I've been duck hunting since the early 90s, and I've been duck hunting every day of season since 2008. And doing what I do here on YouTube, I talk to tons of hunters from all over the country. I get tons of messages every day, and from all that I get, the majority of hunters are having great success right now. Now, if you're in the South, you've been dealt a bad hand. I've been dealt a bad hand here in Arkansas. Ducks are not coming south like they used to. That has nothing to do with their population though. I think that almost solely has to do with weather. But all that's another video for another day on whether they're coming south or not. I'm just urging you to not miss out right now. In my opinion, this is the golden age of waterfowling. Duck population numbers over the past decade has been as high as they ever have, and hunter numbers have been as low as they ever have. I mean, what more could you want as a waterfowler? Unfortunately, I just see a lot of complaining in the sport about this and that and blaming people and pointing fingers. And I'm not saying that we don't have any issues or problems that we shouldn't be concerned about, but overall, I think there's too much complaining in the sport. I think people, if they put in the work and go out there and just enjoy waterfowling, they're going to find that this is the best time to be a waterfowler over these past 10 years. Maybe not specifically right now, but in general, this is a great time to be waterfowling. And I'm just urging you, don't miss out on it. So do your research on the subject. I'll try to leave a few links down below, and have an opinion. I mean, it's important, but have an educated opinion. Thanks for joining me today. I love you, and Lord willing, I'll catch you next time right here on Chasing Green.